we don't impact change from the outside. Getting involved and being on the inside of things is how you really are going to make a difference. Get your voice heard, get your ideas out there, be part of a solution. I often hear young people lament about the things that are going on and why isn't it different in minimum wage and all the different things. And when we sit on the sidelines, we can't make any change. But if we get in there, we can change the things that we see that are not working, bring in the new ideas, bring in the new energy, and get people fired up and excited. One of the most interesting things that I actually read about recently was a simple concept where you don't just go to vote, but you get 5 of your friends to all commit that you're going to vote as a team. You share texting with each other. Hey, I just got there. Have you voted yet? And really make it a thing that you spread out to everybody you know. All these folks voting and encouraging their friends to vote is how we're going to move the needle and really make a difference this cycle.
That's wonderful. And I totally agree. I've been telling a lot of friends myself, hey, go in groups of, 5, 10, even 20. If you got that many friends, get them all out. Even, do your own car rally, drive right to the drop box locations if you got the mail-in ballots, but everybody's got to do their part. All right. Thank you again so much for joining us. Up next, our next panelist is Jordan Laslett. He is the legislative aide for State Rep Matt Bradford. He is minority chairman of House Appropriations Committee, and he is president emeritus of the PA College Democrats. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me here. Very excited to be on this little program with all of you. I think this is such an important message to get across, especially during this election. And as you stated, this is very personal to me, being still, I guess, technically a young person at the nice age of 24. I think, my expertise can maybe rub off on some, but being the former president of College Democrats for Pennsylvania, it was a very intimate issue and struggle that we faced with that organization, whose goal was to get not only college students to get out and vote, but to get basically every young person we came across to get out and vote. And that the tools we used were anything from bombarding the subway stations with voter registration forms to hosting wacky events that we think would engage people that were unsuspectingly walking into, a secret voter registration drive. But it's all things that, it brought out the best innovation in all of us, because it is hard sometimes, especially for young people who are politically engaged, to convince their friends who might not have any inkling of the civic duty that's involved or the idea behind voting, to get them excited about this type of issue, especially when it doesn't affect them. And so I think it's essential that we get young people who are watching things like this, young people that are engaged with their local parties, and to give them the tools to engage those, that they're around and their friends that, might not be as receptive. It can be tough to be the friend, to have to nag others about how important it is to vote without coming off as condescending or without, wanting to rub them the wrong way or catch them at a bad time. And so it takes innovation, and it also takes relationships to really convince people, the essentials of this election. Because, as we saw with TikTok, the people on that app, they did quite the stunt with the president and one of his rallies, and that got everyone talking. That got everyone, concerned about the issue of, will TikTok be here, will it not be? And sometimes it's just one issue that gets people rallied and fired up and ready to go, as we say. And you have to find those niche issues with your friends and with your community members, and then that's how you can pull them in to the bigger equation. But I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much for that, Jordan. All right, we are also joined by Miles Trumbull. Miles currently studies environmental science at Temple University and was part of the PEC ride this year. He's going to be talking to us a little bit more about the environmental policy and the urgency with which we need to be talking about some of these issues relating to climate. Miles, how are you doing?
I'm good, Owen. Thanks for asking. And I feel a little out of place here. You guys seem so esteemed in your political activities, and I'm a little ashamed to admit that this is my first time really getting involved politically. I'm an avid voter. I've always voted, and I kind of attribute that to the way my parents raised me and the morals that they instilled in me. And And I think that that's very important for people. And I feel like voting is something, and being in these political discussions that might get a little bit heated are important things to do. But I also understand why it's being avoided so much, because it can be very dividing. And actually, just recently, I was talking to my best friend, and we talk about everything. But I just found this out just like a few days ago, that he's never voted before. And like, that's something that I feel like I should have known, but I never knew, never asked about. And I sat in the car with him for like 5 minutes trying to get him to vote. And he was just like, no, it's not really affecting me. It's not something that I do. It's not something that I care about. And, I'm not going to push something. Like I said, I'm not one to get all up in somebody's personal business or their ideals. I just left it at that. I said, hey man, you should really vote. And then later I was scrolling through Twitter, and I saw Kamala's point in the vice presidential debate about people under 26 being directly affected by no longer being able to be on their parents' health insurance. Screenshotted that, sent it right over to him, and he might have used different words, but he was just very upset to hear that might be something that's directly affecting him. And I said, go out and vote then. And he said, all right, I'll do it. And I sent him the link to register. And I'm glad to say I changed at least one person's mind about that. So
That's really awesome. And we're really glad you can join us this evening, Miles. Rounding out our panel of guests this evening, we have Rebecca DiValerio. She is the delegate for Congressional District 5, an Emerge 2020 alumni, Delco Democratic Committee member, and secretary of the Women's Democratic Club of Delaware County. How are you doing, Rebecca?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great.
So,
Would you mind telling us a little bit more about what you've been doing with all of these different groups? I know working with Emerge, and especially with the Delco Democratic Committee.
yeah, so pretty much I really am local in Aston, Pennsylvania, which Trump kind of put us on the map in 2016 by wanting to hold a rally here. So it's a very, red area where, the sea of blue is starting to emerge. Tying into Emerge Pennsylvania, I ran for commissioner in my ward last cycle. I was 23 years old, and I said, you know what, there needs to be change here. I was running against the legacy of a man who was commissioner for 54 years. So it's one of those things where I realized if no one else is going to make that change, it's not too young to start to be that person. So that's how I really started to get involved in that type of an aspect. So Emerge Pennsylvania, if you guys have never heard of Emerge before, it is a Democratic women's leadership training program across the entire United States. It's not in every state yet. And it is where you actually have to apply to be in it and get nominated to be a part of it. It's a 20-person cohort. So we learn everything from fundraising, how to phone bank, things like that. So I was really a part of that. And with COVID, I just ended up graduating from that a couple weeks ago. So that was exciting. In Delaware County, really in Aston, I'm in charge of getting yard signs, making sure that the polls are covered. It used to be really difficult to find Democrats to cover polls here in Delaware County, specifically Aston. And now I have no problem at all, which is great. It's a great feeling this election. A lot of young people, even high schoolers, have been reaching out. So that's, how I've done that. And I was a delegate for the Biden, campaign themselves. So that was exciting. And I still am able to phone bank and do some things for the Biden campaign. So.
That's really awesome to hear. Thank you so much for joining us. I did want to mention our program focus for this evening is highlighting younger voters and their significance in the November election. And I know we already have a great deal of questions coming in, so I'm going to pass this right off to Michelle so she can get us started with some questions.
Yep, so I'm going to get it started, but while I am, please take the time and put in whatever's come to your top of mind as well. So first, and this is for all the panelists, please tell us why this is the election of a lifetime and why every young person should register and vote.
And Molly, can we start with you on that question?
Sure. I think as we're seeing that there's a lot of things that we all take for granted, certain things in our lifetime, it's like this is how things have been. And there's a real possibility that we're going to see a significant change And if we vote, that change is going to potentially go the way we want it. And if we don't, it won't. It's pretty interesting to see a president who's actually had the opportunity to potentially put 3 justices on the Supreme Court. That could definitely, and won't even say could, will have a profound impact for decades to come. And because I am working with a state house candidate, I think it is important for folks to recognize that really looking at your whole ballot. I highly recommend starting at the bottom. It's kind of like an ice cream sundae. You need the ice cream. That's where your state house and state senate candidates come in. And why does that matter? This is a census year. So every 10 years they do the census. We redistrict, and not just for the state, but also for the House in DC, which is for our folks, Chrissy Houlihan, who we like a lot. We want to keep her. But if we don't focus on what's going on in our legislature, we could lose everything. So what our Supreme Court did for us ends. This is it. We have to do it ourselves, and we need to make sure it's done correctly. So the list is endless of why. If you're concerned about fairness in voting, fair districts, that is something. If you are electing your people that you think have the same values as you, they're going to work on that for you. Certainly healthcare, certainly not being bumped off the parents' plan, your environmental issues. I know out where I am, Chester Water Authority is a huge issue. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. You find whatever the issue is that matters to you and follow the line. You'll see how directly you can impact that with your vote. And I do understand frustration people have around the electoral college, and they feel like their vote doesn't count. But even there again, that could change if you vote the right people in to change that. Otherwise, you don't vote, everything stays the same.
Thank you so much for that, Molly.
Sure.
And Jordan, just to follow up on that, I know we're going to have quite a few repeats with this question, but specifically to you, why do you believe this is not only just the election of a lifetime, but why, every young person should register and vote? Is there any specific issue you believe that really should point out to young voters?
Yeah, so as you said, I agree 100% with everything Molly mentioned prior, but it really comes down to 2 main points for me. When I kind of, am in a position to attempt to convince someone about why they should vote, I usually bring up position A is the fact that we are on kind of the crux as a nation with this current president, where no one's really noticed before that this election could severely and irreplaceably determine the direction of the country moving forward. I understand young people may say, well, there's been Democrats, Republicans back and forth, and to them I'd say you're absolutely correct in believing that it's not going to matter who wins. But being able to stress the fact that, this is a red alert election. We've got a bipartisan consensus that states that, whoever wins this election will ultimately they'll redesign the foundations of what this country stands for, what their siblings will grow up understanding as cultural norms, what they will grow up or graduate into as a world. And then the second prong is the fact that this is a pandemic election. A lot of young people that are out here graduating from high school looking for a job, or graduating from college looking for a job, are going to be entering an economy in recession. And, I hate to say it, but there's no better motivator to get people politically engaged than to enter an economy where there's no room for them, to enter a marketplace where, they're seeing that they can't find a job, and they dumb it down to, well, it's because this administration did not economically stimulate this area or whatnot. So I would say really just being transparent in the fact that, yeah, it's cliche to say, this is the most important election, but it's also, I would say that's also cliche to say what I'm saying, that it is not cliche this time to say it, because it truly is about the economy. It's about their futures, their bank accounts. And I think if there's one issue that everyone can get behind, whether they love politics or hate it, it's that everyone wants an economically stable future. And that's the nail I try and hammer with younger people.
I love that. And I would totally, again, agree with both you and Molly on what you had to say. So now, Miles, I know you talked about, convincing one of your friends a little more recently with what Kamala had to say in regards to healthcare. Are there any other issues that you believe are very significant in trying to get young voters out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to agree with Jordan saying that this election is kind of setting a precedent for future generations and how we act. I think that a main part of that is dealing with the environment. Obviously, I'm an environmental scientist. You asked me to come on here and talk about the environment, and the fact that Donald Trump is also he's unlike any politician we've ever seen. He's not going to cap carbon emissions. He's not 100% sure. He believes that carbon emissions are making the global temperature rise. And I think that there are going to be some irreversible feedback loops and another 4 years of um, unrelenting production, essentially no caps, no changes, and no. This is a big ship we're trying to steer towards environmental sustainability. It's not, oh, Biden gets elected and then boom, that ship is turned. It's going to take a lot of small movements and a lot of effort from everyone to kind of get a reasonable result.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, I have been seeing a lot of own personal friends talking about how, even if they supported, Bernie or whoever else they might have supported previously, who might have been a little bit more for the Green Deal, even if that doesn't, come and pass, it seems like, Biden is the stepping stone, at the very least, in the right direction, so we can actually bring climate change back on the table. And again, thank you so much for being here. So, Rebecca, tell me a little bit about why you believe this is not just, again, the cliche statement of the election of a lifetime, but what you've seen that personally works for you in talking about issues with some of your friends and some other young voters.
Yeah, so really for me, talking about young voters is really getting them to understand what privileges do you have now as a young person, but what can be taken away from you if you don't think about this election. And it really takes that perspective because it's one of those things where, I'm only 25 now, but I'm coasting even my way into graduate school. We're all taught, yeah, keep going to get a higher education, keep doing this. And, there isn't enough focus on, well, what if this doesn't work? And like Jordan said, people are going into a economy right now, like graduating, even graduate school, high school, trying to find a job in a market that's recessing. And they don't understand how that's going to affect them yet until they really kind of unfortunately experience that. So it's really instilling hey, look, you have privilege. It's not about instilling fear. It's just saying, well, what if that's taken away from you? And, especially with young women voters and, as a woman myself, is realizing there may be a new Supreme Court justice who wants to tell me as a young woman what to do with my body, what my friends need to be doing with their body, reproductive, medicine, even the medicine that Mr. Trump used himself, that it was using stem cells to regenerate, current cells. And that's something that is alarming. I don't think that anyone should, give a young woman advice when they have never been in their shoes. So that's something that is very alarming to me. And it's also alarming as a former biochemistry major is seeing people not letting the specialists, the scientists, actually do their job. So if a scientist is telling me, hey, look, this is what we need to do. We need to wear a mask. We need to be smart in public. That's what we need to be doing. And young voters need to realize that, we need to step up and listen to those people that are higher up and what they're listening to. And if we're going to have a president who is saying science doesn't matter, your college debt doesn't matter, you're going to go get a job, the economy is fine, and sugarcoats everything, that's not the guy for us. So it's really seeing that we need that transparency and honesty in all aspects of our life, and that includes who you vote for.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Yeah,
And
no
you know,
problem.
one of the points you talked about, and I think it was Jordan who also talked about this, you know, just regarding the economy and the importance of the economy. Before we pass this back off to Michelle for a couple more questions, I did see we just had one pop in from Dr. Jerry Allman to Miles. So, as a soon-to-be college graduate, what are you and your fellow students feeling about the job market currently?
Thanks for the question. So I've really been talking to my friends, and it's kind of more all about transitioning into this digital world as we realized a lot of these in-person things no longer need to be in person. And I know for me personally, I had an internship with an environmental consultant agency, and a lot of this stuff was, you know, pulled back, everything being transitioned. So I think it's a lot about transitioning to a new 2020 online world where we're realizing we can do a lot of this stuff in different ways, and then really just trying to get yourself out there. And me and my friends are mostly environmental students, so we're hoping to have jobs in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Michelle, what other questions do we have coming in so far?
Yeah, and actually, Jordan from Dr. Jerry Allman as well, we did have a follow-up for you. Can you tell us specific examples of events that you held to engage your friends or ones that you would recommend that people hold?
Absolutely. So, quite literally, you can disguise any event whatsoever, whether it is social, whether it is formal, and then spring a voter registration drive in the middle of it. Whether it was a formal, in a sense, where it was a gala, where we invited, you know, different groups together to engage each other, to have fun, music, etc., with the entrance fee being you have to register to vote. Whether it is a pizza drive, or whether it's, you know, a lecture from a visiting professor, or someone in a practice that people are interested in, every single event we have always been able to find a way to work in a strategic way to register people to vote. And it, oddly enough, as awkward as some people may think it is to spring up a clipboard and pen on some people and say, hey, by the way, are you registered to vote? It has been received quite well, because usually it's more of a, oh, well, I'm actually, I am, or oh, I'm not. And it usually goes over pretty smoothly. And I would say, you know, if anyone gets upset over voter registration drives at these events, simply add more food and drinks, and I'm sure they'll be fine.
Excellent, excellent. So following up on that, historically, young voters have not come out to vote, even if they have registered, as you mentioned. And recent polls show that 63% of young voters aged 18 to 29 say that they definitely will vote in the upcoming election. But what else can we do to really mobilize them? And I know Jordan's given some of his thoughts. Maybe the rest of the panelists, maybe we can start. Molly, do you have some ideas there?
I will say that making it as easy as possible. You know, when we've been working with the Lincoln University students in the past, we're all on campus. Even the voter location for them is right on campus, but we have actually rented golf carts and driven to the dorms and drive them to the polls. And then we have raffles, food, anything and everything you can think of to entice people. I really feel like voting should be fun, which sounds kind of crazy, but I think the more you can make it a positive experience, the more likely people are going to vote and keep voting. And to me, it's also, I think everything everyone else has said, if you have good messaging, you're going with your friends, you make it fun, and then it's seeing the change. I think that's the key part, is making sure that it isn't just vote and it's done, it's over, and now here we are again. It's, oh, okay, now I'm starting to see the things that I wanted to see happen.
Excellent. Any other thoughts from anybody else?
It's really to just start, the best way to start mobilizing people is having tough conversations. So it's really sitting down with people and saying, what is bothering you? Like, is it gun violence? Is it reproductive rights? Is it the economy? Is it healthcare? Those are some big hallmark things that a lot of people can resonate with. And it's really discussing those conversations, like having those conversations and really showing people like, oh, well, look at what your House rep just did. Look at this. And it's one of those things that we need to start having those conversations, and everyone using their social media platforms to really show that positive aspect of voting and of who is their currently elected people. So, you know, it's really having those conversations. And for young voters too, I can't tell you how many people, I have a roll of them right next to me up on election day, just want that I voted sticker. So it's really one of those things to say, hey, look, if you get that I voted sticker, you get free coffee at Wawa. Some bars give you a free beer. You know, so it's really just making it fun. Yes, it is our civic duty, but we need to show people why it is important to vote and how it's fun and how you can make that difference yourself.
We do.
Can
Oh,
I
go
ask
ahead.
Just one quick thing that it popped
Yes.
into my mind is, I think, making a plan to vote.
Mhm.
So in addition to everything else, is when you're talking with folks, actually saying, when are you going to the polls? What time are you going? How are you going to get there? Really getting specific and having them write it down, and if possible, following up with them. But I've definitely seen that be very impactful.
Mhm.
Yes, no, that's an excellent point. So we do have another question. So CNN pollsters are saying that even though Trump is behind in the polls, his base is far more passionate about voting. Do you believe this? Are you finding passion in young voters for Biden and Harris? And maybe Miles, do you want to tell us what's happening on campus? What's going on out there?
Sure, haven't been on campus in a while, but
Okay, digital campus. I'm sorry, good clarification.
yeah, I'd just like to kind of add something to what Rebecca and Molly said. They said it's a lot about having fun, having a plan, and hitting along these big ticket conversations. And I completely agree with that. But for the longest time, I was having trouble determining how Trump actually affected me. And it was a question that I knew the answer to. I knew he wasn't the best president. I can hear him speak. Like I'm not, well, let me not go there. But thing that is really big to me is really how the person is affected. I think the fact that that people are going to get pulled off their parents' medical insurance and their insurance when they're below the age of 26 should be one of the biggest points in this entire movement here to get young people, because I haven't been affected by, well, at least I have, I'm sure I have, but I feel like I haven't been personally affected by anything in that administration until I noticed that fact. And it's these small tidbits like that will change lives for almost every college student. I don't know a lot of college students paying for their own insurance. And well, maybe we don't have those conversations, but I'm sure a lot of them are on their parents' insurance. And finding ways to determine how individuals are personally affected and which they will be in policy is probably the biggest thing that I could mention. I think it's huge. I think it's understated, and I think instead of fun, we should focus on fear.
Good point.
That's just me.
No, yeah.
All right, Rebecca, would you actually mind commenting on that as well?
Yeah. So I really think, Miles, I know that you have the male perspective, but really any young female voter has to be fearful at this point. It's something that reproductive rights, like that is Roe v. Wade, like this, we have come so long, like so far, but to know, like I have people that I know in my life that have had to have, you know, tough conversations, tough thoughts about their own reproductive rights. And it's expensive, it's unaffordable. And to know that even if Obamacare or, you know, or something else is replaced by that, that can dramatically change the price of reproductive accessibility towards these young voters. And, you know, coming from a middle-class family myself, you know, and being able to go away to college and things like that, you know, as a young voter, I realized, wow, wait, these tax cuts and things are actually hurting my family. Like that extra gift I got at Christmas, or that extra meal, or, you know, the extra visit from my parents couldn't maybe come because of that. You know, the last election, the Hillary Trump election, that was the first election I could vote in. And I, saw how important that was. And, for young voters, like you said too, Miles, it's all about education. It's really making sure the messaging is there to say, hey, this will actually affect you and this is why. It doesn't need to be a long drawn out thing. And that's how you instill that fear in people, but it's proven. So it's not like you're just blowing smoke like our president loves to do. You're really thinking and giving those examples of why it's important and how it's going to affect everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Rebecca. So I know the original comment that we had received was kind of about passion in regards to voting. So I know we have another question here. Many young people were supporting progressive candidates like Andrew Yang, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders. So we saw a lot of passion with a lot of those campaigns. How is that enthusiasm being channeled into excitement and passion for our candidates, Biden, Harris? And Jordan, I know you and I have talked about this before, but from the very beginning, I remember you were very pro Biden. So would you mind answering that question?
Absolutely. So just to set the playing field, so I consider myself to be quite progressive. However, I am painfully pragmatic at times, and it's a fault of my own. But I think one thing that from my anecdotal perspective, what I saw was there was a slew of candidates, many of them, all of them, extremely qualified to be president of the United States. And there was a group of young people that they attracted that were either first-time voters, first-time getting involved, or just they had these ideas that drew them out in such large numbers to the point where that's all they knew in terms of, what things should be. This is what a good policy is. This is right. And they're totally correct. All of their logic based on why they supported the more progressive candidates was completely sound. And where I think initially in the very beginning, the Biden campaign failed to do was to channel that and explain that, look, I'm not saying your ideas are wrong. What I'm saying is, we still have a very large chunk of a generation that will outvote you. And we still have an entire side of the country that will vote against you. And we have to work with that. And I think at first it was met with disdain and, it was warranted. There was a lack of messaging and a lack of communication. Even on my end, when I would express my support for Joe, I sometimes didn't include the caveats and nuances that went behind my initial support. But I think as those initial young, politically active people got further into the process, they learned about, more and more about this electoral college that no one thought was a big problem. They learned more about, holy crap, this generation's outvoting me, by huge margins. Then you realize your generation, my era, my views in this caucus are not enough to get us over the edge. And as the old saying goes, I think everyone's come to the agreement now where it's just because the trolley's not going to the destination you want to be at doesn't mean you're still not going to get on if it gets you a little bit closer. And I think getting young people to understand, in which they've done an amazing job at kind of, they had their anger, everyone was, a little disdain. We let it out, we duked it out, we talked it out. And I think even if it is with tongue-in-cheek comments, we're still riding, that bus together. And I think even if it's not with the most enthusiasm, not with as many smiles, everyone still agrees that we're going to get closer to where we want to go. And anyone who says otherwise, I think they just really need to observe the progress that we as a generation have made while this establishment has been forced to push themselves as well.
Thank you so much for that. And I do also want to pass this off to Rebecca. As a delegate, you are right on the front lines of this conversation.
Yes.
Could you also comment on this for us?
Yeah, so it's one of those things where obviously the first question I got from a lot of my friends and all throughout Delaware County, really, and even CD5 does have a little bit of Westchester County, like Chester County, was, Becca, I thought you were really progressive and you're choosing Joe Biden. You're running for Joe Biden. Like, do you realize that everyone else is still in the race? And I was like, yeah, I completely understand that. And they're like, well, why Joe? And I said, because, you know, I am under the age of 30. Absolutely did the Biden campaign need that young voter, young woman voter to support Joe. But what people, you know, that have started to really more realize is when I first came out saying I'm supporting Joe, I'm running for Joe, I was a CD captain for Joe. Like, I'm on all the big calls with Joe. And it was, I need someone that represents me. And Joe Biden, even though it seems very outdated, he was on the front lines of progressive back in the day. I mean, he wrote the Violence Against Women's Act. Joe has always rolled up his sleeve and has done his work regardless of who he's working for. And I've seen him help, you know, middle-class families. I know people that he knows in Delaware that he has helped. He is really a people person. He understands, you know, what's difficult. And he, you know, yes, at the beginning, was his messaging bad? Absolutely. Everyone will say that, probably even the Biden campaign would, to the young voter. Because Joe was really trying to relate with the middle class and that upper middle class on why they needed to do better. Now looking, you know, he picked Kamala Harris, who has always done an amazing job. Yes, has some of her, you know, things that when we look at now, seeing why some people are behind bars, especially for drugs, you know, weed, things like that. Were those questionable? Absolutely. Is that now something that young voters are really sitting back and saying, well, how did they actually make that a bipartisan deal? How did they do that? And I think that that's really where young voters, and I think that's what the campaign's showing now, is it's not the lesser of two evils. It's really who is going to get us to where we want to be and who has the toolbox to do so. You know, they have both been, I don't like to use this term at all, career politicians, because I don't like that term, but they have been there. They've been in the trenches. They know what it's like to be broken down and built up. They weren't given $1 million loan from daddy to say, oh, go and do whatever you want. Like, they know what it is to work for things. And I think that that's what the Biden campaign has done a really good job with resonating in young voters, young voters. And really the Biden campaign is talking about how to get out to vote, and they're educating the voter, which is so important in any presidential candidate.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to squeeze in one quick question before we go to our last question with Michelle. So we've been talking about a bunch of different issues so far, but one thing that we haven't really talked about is the NRA. So yesterday, David Hogg tweeted, when we have the highest youth voter turnout in American history, we are not only going to take down Trump and his fellow NRA puppets, we are going to change the face of American politics forever. Do you agree? And Molly, if you wouldn't mind starting us off with that question.
Yes, I think when young people get engaged and they vote, absolutely. I think you could change the face of politics cataclysmically. If folks who are young get out and turn out in their full numbers, they can move this in any direction they want, not just this election, but any election. That certainly is something we saw. I mean, I bring up Lincoln University a lot because it's a group of folks we're really working with to get them more engaged. And in 2019, they wanted to see if they could affect change at the local level. They turned out in strong numbers to vote, and they flipped a township supervisor seat in Lower Oxford that had been held by Republicans forever. And they were shocked that their vote could make that kind of difference. So I think that's a small example, but on a larger scale, when young people say, hey, we're going to do this, and they get out there and they turn out, whether it's because they think it's fun or because they're afraid or some combination thereof, yes, you can change the trajectory significantly.
Thank you for that. Would anyone else like to comment on that before we go back to Michelle for that last question? All right. So Michelle, I think we have one more question for our panelists.
Yes. So what is the important message that you would like to leave with young voters tonight on why they should get out, register, and vote?
And let's start with Rebecca for that question.
All right. So the last thing I want to leave with everyone watching, young voters specifically, is you can make the change. You don't need anyone here to tell you that you can do it. You can make change small or large. Always vote on the down ballot. Be educated in your voting. And know that if you're worried about losing your health care, I'm still milking mom and dad's health care myself at 25. I'll be 26. If you're worried about that, I personally know people that have been affected by gun violence and have lost their lives. And that was at a young age. It's one of those things where if you really think about how your family was affected when you were younger to now, even when you were 10, it does affect you, especially women and reproductive rights. So just know, if it's from voting, sending a text to your friends, you're making a difference.
Thank you for that. And Miles, same question to you. What important message would you like to leave with our young voters this evening?
Yeah, so I guess the main message would just be that, kind of going off Rebecca said, this will affect you. This election will affect you. The young people, we're the ones inheriting the earth. The people in power right now, in 20, 30, 50 years, they're all going to be dead, and we're going to be the ones that are left with what's behind. And we need to make sure that we are heading in the right direction. And everybody might not be ecstatic about Joe and whatever, because he's had a very long career and everything he said, but you can't deny that this is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Miles. And Molly, same question to you.
I think your vote is your voice. And if you don't vote, you're silent. And there are a lot of folks out there that really like the idea that young people don't vote. They don't want to be bothered with the issues that matter to young people. The only way that you get your issues front and center is use your voice, vote, and get everybody to vote. And it seems simple, but that's it.
Thank you, Molly. And thank you again for joining us.
Sure.
All right. And Jordan, same question again to you. What important message would you like to leave our young voters with this evening?
The simple fact that, as a young person myself, this is our moment to prove to not only the nation, not only the other generations within it, but to the world, to prove to them that this generation, your generation, our generation, can sit here, observe a president, having zero political experience, ourselves in the past, observing that what is happening in America is fundamentally wrong. That growing up, as we enter into our professional lives, we're not going to stand for the injustice and intolerance that we see. The message I would say is, the ball's in our court. And I think all of us would revel in the opportunity to provide America with the biggest smackdown election, we can have on the type of hatred and bigotry that support, that side of the ticket. And I think whether it's for the bragging rights or it's for the dignity and honor of the nation, I think that's something every young person can get behind. And I think we should all look forward to being able to say, you know what, that election of 2020, that was us, and we're proud of it. And I hope that everyone, can get as hyped up or passionate about that as I am.
Thank you so much for that, Jordan. I just wanted to let everyone watching know, if you have a pen, your phone, write this number down. It is the PA Voter Assistance Hotline. The number is 1-833-728-6837. We'll post that number again later after the webinar. I also just wanted to quickly advertise this entire webinar this evening was brought to you by voteallofustogether.com. We welcome your donations at our site. All proceeds go to turning Chester County blue. Connect with us and get a free sign or bumper sticker. This time next week, we are going to be talking about the topic of Issues Matter. We discussed quite a few different issues already tonight between the economy, healthcare, and a lot more will be discussed this time next week, October 20th. That's next Tuesday at 7:30. That will be the last webinar of our series before the election this year. And again, we will be joined by another great group of panelists. Thank you all panelists again for joining us this evening, and I hope you all have a great night.